I always think of the Haven's.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the February program of the Houston County Historical Society. If you would, silence your phones. And be sure and sign in. There's a sign-in sheet here. We will start off with the pledge to the flag by Clint Reynolds. He's to our right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Remember, dues are payable $10 per year per household or $50 per lifetime per household. Meeting minutes. Anybody have any questions or did not get theirs or? Okay, we will say the.
Recommend approval as read.
All right.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes are done. Treasurer's report.
We have $2,350 in the bank. We had some expenses last month and only interest expense in January. And the CD is still unchanged at $11,400.
Recommend we approve it as presented.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we'll get this out of the way and we'll start the fun stuff. The old business. We still have the cemetery maps, books. Check with Melissa in the archives, and if you would like to purchase some of those, she can pick you up. New business, do we have any new business other than our program? Okay. If everybody's ready, we'll get started on our program. If there's anything else I can think of. Melissa asked that her archives program be part of her presentation, so we will get started with whoever wants to start. Please try to keep between these two columns so we can get you on film. And you might not want to pass around some of the stuff. It looks very fragile. So if you want to just leave it on the table, we can look at it after the meeting. I'm so glad to have everybody out here with the rain. So glad y'all showed out. Update on the archives. We've been very, very busy, as we always are. But I want Leah to stand, please. Miss Leah is our, right now, one and only volunteer. She comes twice a week in the afternoons. And she has done a phenomenal job. I could not have gotten as much done without her. As of today, I started some of this, she finished the rest of it.
And some of the files Ann worked on too.
Yeah, but we have indexed all of the circuit court loose records, the criminal and the civil, from 1871 to 1989. The general sessions, which she finished up today. I don't remember what year those start, because general sessions came later.
20s, I believe.
Yeah, 1920s up to 1969, they have been indexed. And Chancery Court, it goes back to, I think, 1871, up to, what are you up to today? 80-something.
90, that's the new one.
Oh.
That's the ones that, yeah, 90s.
And this is the
93,
90s.
94.
Yeah. So these are indexed. And so if someone were to come in and want to know about a court case, of course we have all the minute books, but the loose files are all of the extra paperwork that goes with the court case, such as affidavits, subpoenas, witness statements, things like that. And so we have indexed all of those up that far, which is fantastic. and she's done a lot of this indexing. She's a phenomenal with Excel. I know just enough to get myself in trouble. We've had a tremendous amount of donations recently. We've had, of course, with the military World War II program coming up in August, people have been dropping off and allowing us to digitize some things, but we've had some great outright donations of materials, records, photographs, and also artifacts. And so y'all need to come by the archive and see some of the new stuff. There were 3 things that I'm going to ask everyone to be on the lookout for in your own collections, and I'm not asking you necessarily to donate it, but just to look. One of the things that I find is that when people look at their photographs, whether they're in boxes or photo albums or loose, you tend to look at the people. And that's great. We should document the people in our community. But I'd appreciate it if you get out those boxes of photos and the albums and look for buildings. Look for the buildings in your photographs, especially if they're Houston County buildings. You'd be amazed at how many phone calls and emails I get of people wanting to find pictures of buildings in Houston County. Just recently, I had Jen's over at Jen's Diner ask me for any photographs of her, part of her building, in the square. I have had Alice, who manages the Seigel lot, contact me wanting any old photographs of the Mallory store and Seigel lot, any old like that. So if you can look at your photographs, and if you have any photographs, even if it's got people in them, of any buildings in Houston County, please get with me. You can email me, you can scan them and email them to me. Come by the archives, I'll be glad to digitize them and hand them right back to you. Of course, we always take them on donation if you want to do that. But start looking for some buildings in your photographs. Newspapers. We accept donations of newspapers. We are trying to collect every newspaper that was ever printed in Houston County. We have the Stuart Houston Times going back, not to the beginning, but as much as has been collected on microfilm. But we also are collecting the physical newspapers. Now, before the Stuart Houston Times, there were other newspapers like the Houston County Times. And we have many of those issues, actual issues, that haven't even been microfilmed, but have been donated over the years. I've talked to the Tennessee State Library and Archives. As soon as we have what they call enough of those newspapers, they want to microfilm them because they are very interested in documenting every single newspaper in Tennessee. So we will be doing that with them. But we need the newspapers. I have people wanting things out of newspapers all the time. Our newspapers are not digitized and online anywhere. Actually, the new newspaper, the Herald, is actually on newspapers.com. You can actually read all of theirs on newspapers.com. But the Stuart Houston Times as a whole is not online anywhere, and our older newspapers. So we really need to make sure that we try to preserve as many of those as we can. And lastly is yearbooks. We got a great donation from Kay and this Aaron Elementary of yearbooks. And so we have people, I know, almost on a weekly basis contact us wanting to see old yearbooks. And so if you have yours or your families, or if you know of some, please consider donating them. We would like to have as many of the yearbooks as possible. So that's my update on the archives, and I'm going to tell you what I brought tonight. I honestly don't have any documents. I have a few photographs, World War II wise, from my own family. My grandfather on my father's side actually did not, they told him he was going to be better served staying at home. He worked at a place called McMillan Brothers in Akron, Ohio. So they kept him here. My other grandfather on my mother's side was in the military, but he never went overseas. So he stayed stateside during World War II. So I wanted to bring this. This was just recently donated this past week for the program in August. I don't know if any of you will remember a gentleman by the name of Bobby Walker. Donald remembers him. Miss Brenda remembers him.
He's a cousin.
He grew up here. Did he go to school here?
Yes. I graduated with him.
You graduated. Well, he made a visit to the archives last week, and he brought his father's military uniform which I did not bring because I was worried about the rain. But the uniform has all of the ribbons, all of the medals. It is a full uniform, and he donated it. And he also donated all of these documents, which I'll put up here. His honorable discharge, and this is another letter from the War Department. His order to report for induction letter, along with the envelope that it came in, and a letter from President Harry Truman. And he donated a letter that was written by his father. His father was Humphreys Liston Walker, and I've been told by some that he went by the nickname of Steamboat.
Right.
So I don't know where Steamboat came from, because he was in the Army. But I could see it in the Navy, but not in the Army. But his nickname was Steamboat. So here's a letter that he wrote to his brother, Rube Walker, during the World War II time. And that wonderful is these pictures from the World War II era. So we were very, very glad to have it. He brought it last week, and Miss Brenda showed him the way and brought him to us. So very nice gentleman, and we're glad to have these for Houston County History for the military program in August. So that's all I got. Y'all don't be bashful, come on. We're all friends here.
From Dad's Army jacket, World War II, and there's a cat, and it's not the color I thought it would be. It's kind of an off brown, but it's not the brown. Maybe it's 80 years old, I don't know. And I don't know. I'm sure some of you know what all these little bars are. You see it?
Length of service on the sleeve.
Here's some.
I don't think your dad had that.
No, anyway,
Old timers? I know there's
He
not
wasn't on there.
any in here, but.
They're called hash marks.
hash marks. Oh, it's football. Satisfied the result of the Super Bowl. But anyway, just brought that. I believe I've shown this knife before, and I figured at our age a lot of us wouldn't remember. Dad stayed in South Pacific during the war, and I guess all military installations, bell call was a big deal.
Right.
And they would go to it, some they knew they weren't gonna get anything, but they would go anyway, just like going to mess hall. And Daddy's buddy was there with him all the time. He never received anything in the mail. One day, a box came in at bell call, and he got all excited, and he opened it up, and the only thing in the box was this knife. And it's still around. But I'll put it back in my pocket.
Yeah, it needs to look closer for me, because I don't talk loud, okay? Unless I lean over. There you go. Okay. Let me show you the picture first. I'm gonna leave it flat because I put it in this because it was rolled up. And this is the best way to display it. My dad is, I think, I put my glasses on, with my glasses. Sorry. He's on the front row. He's the fourth one on the front row, the fourth one from the right. Okay, the picture was taken April 15th. Oh, no, this was taken
not in April, maybe in June. But first of all, let me do a little bit of a backstory. My dad was 6'6". He's a little tall for the Navy, but he was able to get a waiver, and that's a whole other story. And he went to Virginia, to the Naval Training Base. He arrived on April 15th, 1942. That was his first anniversary, and Mom and Daddy had been married 1 year. He was 29 years old when he went into basic training. He wrote, in 1972, my sister gave him a series of notebooks and asked him to write his memoirs, which he did. He wrote up through the 50s, and he didn't continue after that. But I would encourage anybody to write their memoirs. Your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will think it's the most interesting thing they've ever read. That's how my grandson spent his Thanksgiving vacation, was reading his great-grandfather's memoirs. But Daddy wrote about basic training, and the story that I love the most about his basic training, I thought I would read it to you. It's not very long. The only major problem I had in boot training was shoes. We were ordered to put all of our clothes in a cardboard box, which the Navy would ship home. Even though I told the chief I had big feet, he was not inclined to listen. He answered, the Navy small store can fit anybody. The uniform was barely adequate, the sleeves were a bit short, the jacket failed to cover the seat of my pants, but the shoes were size 12. I insisted I needed a size 15, but the quartermaster said 12 is the largest size we have. Our instructor insisted the Navy shoes sizes ran larger than most civilian products and told me to try the pair I was issued. Of course, at the end of the day, the failure of the experiment was obvious. I had so many blisters and red places that I was excused from close order drills the second day and given permission to wear my own black perforated wing-tipped Oxfords. At the second Saturday inspection, the inspecting officer, a spit and polish type, looked me over from top to bottom. When he spied my non-regulated shoes, he turned to our chief instructor and demanded, "What's the meaning of this?" And the chief just said, "Mallory, you tell him." I said, "Sir, I was issued size 12 shoes. My feet are size 15. He just shook his head and walked away. Every time we had a different inspecting officer, there was a similar scene. My chief eventually asked the supply to order larger shoes for me. When I received them 1 year later, they were size 14. But the chief was right. Navy shoes are larger. My new regular shoes were comfortable, but by that time the Navy had the Navy store supplied a stock of 14s. So my dad spent the first year in the Navy in wing-tipped shoes. The other item I brought, I found my aunt passed away in 2020, and I inherited all of her stuff, and minus someone's taken the stamp up, but this is a little postcard that I found in her things, and it must have come from one of her boyfriends. And it was, and I brought it because it was May 30th of 1943. So it's got the little sailor on it, and it says, "I ain't one of the big guns yet, but I'm looking into it," as he stares into the. That's the problem.
But now let me add to your story.
What?
Being the son-in-law, let me add to your story.
You want to tell him how a 6'6" guy got into the Navy?
Yes. He went through and they rejected him. I said, go. So, and then there was a guy there, and he went over to the officer in charge and said, bring him back. So they brought him back in. And they passed him, said, you're in. And they didn't have, the uniform wouldn't fit or anything else. The guy's name was Gene Tooney, heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He was in charge of athletics, and they wanted a basketball player.
He was too
Second time through, they past him.
He was 2 inches over the regulation height, and the doctor said to him, because I just read it last night in his memo, the doctor said to him, son, how bad do you want the Navy? And Daddy says, well, I'm wanting the Navy pretty bad. And he says, okay, in that case, just keep bending your knees.
While you're there, I have forgotten, what was your dad's name?
Jess Mallory,
I knew him.
Jesse Drawn Mallory.
He drew attention when he came to here.
Oh, yeah.
He was much of a man.
Yeah. He played basketball for the Wiseman Violets.
Yeah,
Nobody
sure.
here, well, I'm sorry, but I guess there are a few here who remember the Wiseman Violets.
He was a referee, wasn't he?
He was a referee. He refereed basketball games, and I remember he would be at games where you cheered when you were a cheerleader.
When I was in college at Tennessee Tech, I had this big referee. I mean, he was big. And we were playing Western Kentucky, and Ed Diddle always had his red towel. And somebody stole his red towel. And this big referee gets up and says, the game will not start until the towel shows up. About 40 towels showed up. And that's the first time I ever saw him. No, the first time I ever saw him, I was playing football for Donaldson back in '57. And this guy that was on our line, he was kind of a clown anyway. He pulled and he took this referee out. And I mean, the referee fell for like a big tree. And I'm standing there and I'm grinning, and I remember the man saying to me, "What you grinning at?" Little did I know, when I met him, when I was dating Suzanne and before we married, you would never forget him. I said, he didn't remember. Long later, I told him about that. He was quite an innocent person, but his career in the military was outstanding.
Keep with this table, Lynn, you and Glenn.
Yeah, why not?
I'll do it, because I was just listening.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, because I was just listening. I know some of you have met my father. My father is 97 years old, and he is a World War II vet. He served in the 20th Armored Division, but he got in towards the end. And so, for example, he told me a couple months ago, they got to the bulge right after the battle. They were sent north to Argonne thinking that the Nazis were headed that way to Bavaria, but they weren't. And then he was sent to Camp Lucky Strike at the end, and he was waiting to come home. But while he was there, he liberated, as he likes to say, a few items from the Germans. And I just recently got them. He had 2 bayonets that were off of German weapons. And a knife. Oh, Glenn, you might have to. It was a police knife. This was off of a police officer of some sort.
Yeah, he was a senior, it was the knife that was carried by the senior law enforcement official in the city, according to some internet research I did. Yeah, there's a release.
There's a release here somewhere, but
yeah, it's like halfway
so,
down.
he also liberated a violin. And my father was a musician. He played the violin a little bit before the war, and then he found one. And I know I've seen the scene in MASH where they go over the French horn. But his friend, he was traveling, he was in the infantry, but he was on a half-track. And he found this in a barn in France. He found this violin. And he was playing it, and his friends got tired of listening to him play it. And they did, in fact, put it underneath the half-track. So he wasn't able to bring it home. But, so I just brought those to show.
Let me add to that. Before Herb went over to Europe, he was stationed at Camp Campbell up here in Europe. My grandfather worked for the post office his entire life and was stationed at Camp Campbell. So we figured they ran into each other on a mail run. I mean, it really is a small world after all.
Yeah.
Because Herb is from Brooklyn, New York, and my dad is from, my grandfather was from Cunningham. So,
And he always, growing up, like I said, he said, my dad grew up in Brooklyn. My father always liked cornbread, and I figured that was something New York. And he came to visit, the first time he came to visit after Glenn and I were dating, and Glenn made cornbread, made dinner, and made cornbread that we all know and love. And my father was in Hoggett. So he hadn't had it in, 50 years. And that was what he remembered from when he was at Camp Campbell.
Mayo?
Get my motor running. Good start.
Oh.
Okay. Well, in keeping with our theme of World War II, I didn't get to bring the old things I was going to bring for show and tell, but I had been gathering a few items of the military basis for our August program. But I know some of you knew my dad. This is a picture when he entered the Navy. This was in 1943. He had had a deferral for 2 years. He was welding. Started out at the National Bridge Company, and he was in Evanston, Indiana for over a year, and therefore deferred from active duty. But the reason I brought this picture is a lot of history when we have pictures of military people. From Daddy's insignia here, you can see what his rank is and what his assignment was. He was a ship fitter, 3rd class. And he was also in, well, not also, just in the CBs, which is the construction division for the Navy. And so this picture was made at his entrance into the Navy. So it's 100, no, okay, it's 82 years old. Now, we'll lay that aside for a moment. And I thought, well, what can I carry that I've got on my dad's? Because Dad, he didn't give me nothing. And my dad lived in a duplex with my sister when he passed away. So my sister ended up with all of the belongings. And so I called her and I said, what's going on? And what have you got? Well, she told me she had his dog tags. And so she brought him to me. Excuse my zip ties, but I didn't want to lose anything. There is a tremendous amount of history on dog tags. I didn't know that until I started researching it. She brought these 2 dog tags. They're oval shaped. They got a hole in each side. I told her, that ain't my daddy's dog tags. I've had dog tags 85 years myself. No, not 85, 65. And I said, this is what a dog tag looks like. And so I got out my Google and started learning things. And I learned that was, let me get it back up here, the oval ones was the dog tags for the Navy in World War II. There was an inscription on the dog tags that I didn't know what it meant, and I never found it. It's a T, the letter T, and a date. Well, as I studied the two dog tags, The other one has also got a T on it, but a different date. So I found out just simply that these were, they're typhoid records. And of course, Dad was in the South Pacific, and I'm assuming that he either had to have 2 doses, they're 90 days apart, 2 doses, or he had it twice, irregardless. But I brought my own dog tags, and the history continues to go. On these that were issued in 1958, they got a little indentation in it here. I see some heads shaking. How many of you know what that indentation is for? All right. I'll be able to tell you without saying it's a lie. The information on the internet is a little bit different. That notch does have something to do with the identification of the deceased individuals. And of course, I went through my tenure, and all I ever learned that was the notch went in your teeth, into the deceased. And it fitted in such a way, and it was to be kicked, and that would jam the dog tag up into the deceased teeth, and therefore the record of their name, et cetera, was kept. The website does not give that information. It says the notch is for the machine that they used in the field to stamp the information that is invoiced on your dog tag to paper, which was shipped in. So anyway, there's more information on there. Your blood type, I think most of you would know that. And as the different eras flourished, they changed the design of the dog tags. I do not know what they are right now, but that's not what we're talking about. World War II. Here is a belt buckle that my dad made when he was in the South Pacific. He was on Guadalcanal for a little over 2 years, and a couple of other of the islands in the South Pacific, but just short periods of time as they moved along. I mentioned earlier with the photograph, Daddy was a ship fitter, 3rd class. They gave him that rating that's equivalent to a sergeant, a buck sergeant in the Army. They gave him that rating because he had been welding in the shipyards. And they sent him to the South Pacific, and there wasn't no welding over there. So he complained, and it took him over 2 years to hear his complaint. And they actually shipped him back to the States in September of 45. And the war was over, August, am I remembering that right? August. And so he did not have to go back. In other words, he went out. But there's a little piece of paraphernalia that they were doing. It didn't have a lot to do on them islands. But, and the reason for that is the Marines had gone in a year before and cleaned those islands out. And so it was more of a standing guard. The only activity that they ever saw was at night when a Japanese might slip back into the camp from the other side of the island. I'll lay these up here for anyone that might want to look at them. And that's my tale. I'll sneak it to them.
James, did you have anything? Alan, I skipped you. Did you have something?
Oh.
No? Okay. Ms. Peggy, you bring it? Sid, you want to go for it? Man.
won't take long, I'm a man of few words.
Yeah,
I'm done. Y'all bring back a lot of memories. I was a welder in the military. You think that's a pretty neat job. When I showed up for my assignment, I said, I'm gonna be quick and show you your first priorities. And that's all equipment. Yeah. That sergeant called, need some pot fixed, pan welded, and feed the troops. I made a lot of good friends with cooks. So I did, I fixed a lot of stuff. But welding was interesting. But bring back a lot of these things that you all are talking about. What was someone said about the induction time? Induction letters? Okay. My youngest brother was born May the 20th. And my oldest brother reported the next day. So, I mean, look, check him out. We didn't know these old guys came back from World War II. So, I've been digging out quite a bit of stuff. And for the display, some of the pictures to add to your collection. One I have been given a friend of mine. But those of you that are talking about the history, being Navy, whatever, the 4 volumes of pictorial history of the Second World War. Those pictures are in here that all of us have been talking about. Yeah, bring back a lot of memories. The Gap, that kind of stuff. The things that Leah's dead. My older brothers brought back a lot of memorabilia that they picked up on the battlefield. And me and little brother played with a lot of that stuff. We had bayonets and rucksacks, and the whole, everything that GIs brought home. So, the pictures, books of related to World War II, but time-wise, the only thing I could come in, well, not military, but it's almost income tax time. And some of you mentioned, did anybody know my dad? 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't. I take that back, I did. But he was gone 5 days a week, all my life. So, I have one older brother now, and his daughter, my daughter, was given the trunk that my dad had in Memphis all of my life. And goodness gracious, things I found out about my dad in the last year. Well, he did get an income tax back, 1945. Paid George to see him, McMillan, $0.10. He'd had a job in that same trunk. It wasn't document of a certain year prior to 1942, the war years, when he had 6 children, 0 income, owned no property, lived with his in-laws and his parents, and this is prior to me, my next older brother, and younger brother. So he didn't have any work, as so many did those early years and leading up to, he did finally get an income tax in 1945. I kind of keep that. If anybody wants to see it, it'll be over here. And that's some of the other things. For your collection of World War II memorabilia, there are some pictures. Former brother-in-law of mine in a unit in World War II, which is also in the book. But Daddy being a railroader, and somebody said his job was locked in. There's certain jobs you had leading up, going into service, you were locked in. Well, Daddy being a security officer on a railroad, he kind of had to watch what he was doing. Plus, he had 9 kids. So his billy club. I found that in that. Now, he didn't use that on us. Y'all hadn't noticed that, had you? I told these guys that my mom never spanked us. And I asked somebody about a seamstress and a tailor, but Mother was constantly sewing, and she always had a thimble on. And kids are going to get, boys are going to get in reach of your mother sometime during the day. Come here, Sid, you gotta go do something. I handed her a pocketbook. She reached up and wham, right between the eyes. One of these things. And Mother raised 9 not-headed kids. So I survived. But she dropped out of high school in senior year. Her father had just died. And in this trunk was a document where she got a public school diploma from Erin, the county, Houston County, 1919, and so forth. And it's not connected to World War II, but, and not the theme, but it's kind of date-wise. At one time, Mom had her 2 oldest sons in a war in World War II, while us 2 young ones was in diapers in Tennessee Ridge, and the other 5 were in school. And she had not had her 45th birthday.
I forgot about some military thing tonight, so I'm gonna save mine till next time.
Well, you can do it now.
No, I'll just save it, I'll save it.
It might not be. We might have something else next time. You want it?
Okay, we'll do it.
Get you on tape and
Well, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Well, my theme tonight is crackers. Who can remember when we used to get our saltine crackers out of a metal tin? Y'all old enough to remember all that, instead of a box anyway. A little background on this. This was painted, hand painted now. I want y'all to really look how well done it is. Really well done all over. Very nice. Okay, let me get it right. The sign of Miss Nina Gillespie. Okay. A little background on Nina Gillespie. She's from Memphis. She is the mother of Albert Gillespie, who was married to my first cousin, Kathy Alsbrooks. Kathy Gillespie, of course, Kay knows. Kay Randall will shake your head on that. Most of y'all will. About that. Age-wise, late 60s probably. Mother, I'm no doubt bought it for her, but it's very, very nice. We're talking about old things, and I thought I'll bring them the cracker box. But that's basically what I brought. Next.
Back in December, I went to the Civil War show in Nashville and found 3 treasures I want to share with y'all. I had, over the years, seen a lot of soldiers' tickets that were used during the Civil War, but I'd never seen a complete unissued ticket. This is a blank soldier's pass from Richmond to Mobile, Alabama, which had been quite a trip in the 1860s. As you can see, it hasn't been filled out, but when it was issued, they put in the numbers and then the soldier's name. And as I say, I've seen individual tickets before, never complete one. The bottom ticket goes from Richmond to Burkesville, Virginia, so that would be cut off and left with train. Then you went from Burkesville to Lynchburg, and then from Lynchburg to Bristol, Tennessee, from Bristol to Knoxville, Knoxville to Chattanooga, Chattanooga to Corinth, Corinth to Mobile, and then this is the ticket that the soldier would have left with him. On the backside, the trains would send the tickets back in to be reimbursed for his pass to get home with it. And that's, you know, that's state-of-the-art traveling at the time. Right. This one's a little sad. Everyone's familiar with an indentured servant. This is dated 1822, and the top half of it is where the parents, Ann McKay and William McKay, and they made X's, the marks over, they couldn't sign their own names. What they were doing was giving their 4-year-old son to the city of Charleston and an orphanage. The bottom half of it, after the boy became, I guess he's 10, Andrew Berry took him as an indentured servant and taught him how to farm. And then when he reached 16, he had farming skills. But that's just so sad to see that the parents, what they had to do with poverty and training of children at that time. No food stamps, no system to fall back on. The second indenture is the equivalent of a deed, and this one is dated 1839, and it's pretty much, you're welcome to look at it. It's the same features that's in any deeds today. The thing I found interesting in it is that this is in the 3rd district, this is state of Georgia, the 3rd district, formerly Cherokee territory. So this has been the first deed after the Trail of Tears and the Indians had been run off their land, the white men started settling.
Carol?
Being a librarian or an ex-librarian, we're still always a librarian. I have my daddy's book of all of the people that were in his unit, and it is the pictorial history of the 75th Field Artillery Brigade. And this is from Camp Forest, 1941, 1942. And in it, there are lots of young men from Houston County that are in this book because they were already members of the National Guard. So they were activated right away and got to play the real thing sooner than most. So they had been sent to Camp Forest. And then, this is just the page, I put this down here. You can see my dad in one of them, and if you remember Boots Knight, everybody remember Mr.? I don't know his real name, he was always just Boots. What is Boots' real name? Anyway, Janie Roby's uncle, Sissy Roby's brother. What's his name? My daddy was stationed in New Guinea and in the Philippines for several years, and when the war ended, he got to come home, and he brought Mother something back from the Philippines. And these are little, she had a size 5 shoe, but I know I got to play in them. And probably that's why it's torn up, it's because Kate probably played with it. But it's carved out in there, and it was handmade. And her name, Becky, is on the sole of the shoe. And the other one that I have is I had an uncle that served in the Army as well, and he was given this Bible, you've probably seen them before, from his uncle and aunt. And it's the testament for his pocket in World War II. And that was Harold Page's. So that's it. I'll make it brief.
Maybe you should bring it too. A lot of folks have uniforms and stuff that they save, that their families save. Don's dad wasn't as careful with his uniform, so he had an old overcoat, and it was in really, really poor condition. And so we thought about throwing it away because it was just moth-eaten and everything. But we decided to cut the buttons off and take the epaulet that was on the shoulder and save the buttons and put them in a keepsake box. And then we had his unit patch, his combat infantryman's badge, and the ribbons that he would wear on his uniform. He was in the European campaign, and the first ribbon on the top indicates that he got a Bronze Star. The second ribbon is his European campaign one, and it has 3 battle stars for the Battle of the Bulge, Rhineland, and Central Europe. And the next one is the World War II Victory Medal, and the bottom one is the Good Conduct Medal. So if you have an old uniform or something that isn't presentable to share or save, you might think about cutting the buttons off and keeping it for the kids.
Is there anybody else before we get to Mr. Spurgeon? Because it's going to be easier to take the camera over there.
Our collection of World War II stuff actually fits in one of the long bins. It's this long and this high and about that wide. We were fortunate that my dad kept a number of his records, and then Diane's stepfather, Malcolm Stockard, kept a lot of his as well. And what I brought is just a couple of things out of it that I thought were interesting, and I understood you wanted something that was different. Well, one of the first things that I looked at was this. And most of you would recognize it as a flute. And that's what it is. It actually goes back to the 7th century in China. That's where they were originally made and originally played. This one belonged to a Japanese soldier in the Philippines at this point. And what they did is that when the officers did whatever they wanted to do, they had their meditation and they were out of the battle scene, they usually had one individual that could play one of these. And the unique thing is that when you have someone that knows what they're doing with this, is they can actually create multiple octaves. And so they can have, the range is huge, and they can play most anything that you want with this. So this one, Malcolm Stockard liberated from a Japanese soldier in the Philippines. We're there. It actually is called, and it's probably mispronounced here, but it's a sakayuchi, and but that's what it stood for. So I'll let you do it. Primarily, just to let you know, this was originally hand carved, and in the factories, and then they put the metal on, and the only way that you know it was truly hand carved is when you get down to the end, you can see the indentions where that they actually did part of that. Next item, the Japanese officers like to stay cool in the tropics. They carry fans with them. And so this one has the Japanese writing on one side, what it's for and who it's for. And of course, it had the famous meatball, as the Americans like to claim. I do have my dad's. He was part of the 6th Division. He was in the 251st, I believe, Field Artillery. And he served in both New Guinea and the Philippines as well. And Malcolm Stockard, we called him Poss. I didn't know hardly Malcolm for years. It was always Poss. But Poss also was in New Guinea and also in the Philippines, and they most of the time were no more than a mile apart. Mr. Stockard was an engineer, and so when they would move the artillery up or whatever, he'd be replacing bridges that they had blown up, so he was involved with that. Another thing that I pulled out of the bin, and this is silk, by the way, and this has been around for a while. Now, this is not truly a flag, per se, which you would immediately think for. This was an item that was presented by the family or members of the family to a soldier that was being assigned to a foreign station. So what they did is they wrote all different kinds of slogans on here. I'd love to be able to decipher and know what actually was said. So if somebody speaks Japanese, we can arrange a meet and you can tell me what it says. But anyway, this one was also liberated by Mr. Stockard as well. Next item is this one, and I thought, okay, this is just another flag. I wasn't really for sure exactly what it was, but then when you start looking at the ties, this actually is a flag that the Japanese officer would use and tie on his sword. And so when they were getting ready to charge, they would put a wire underneath the blade or on the back side of the blade, and they would tie this on. And they would wave this to rally the troops behind them to let them know that they needed to move forward. So that's what this one is. And again, Mr. Stockard liberated that from there. Getting ready for this. This is all Japanese currency money for the Philippines. And I thought, well, you know, it's probably worthless. We'll just, you know, what's in here? I began to look and I said, okay, I looked it up online. These things sell for about $3 to $10 each in there. That's the demand that's there. And just to give you an idea, the two flags, they want $325 for the real one each. The flute is $725. So it's worth a little worth something. I'm going to tell my son he needs to insure this stuff. These are pictures from Malcolm Stockard, Poss Stockard, who lived in Tennessee Ridge forever in there. But he was, like I said, he was an engineer. A lot of his here, he was originally supposed to go to, I think, not in South Africa, but Africa. He didn't. He ended up being assigned. That's the other part of this, is that in the unit that Dad was in, and I have his unit place here, there was a Willard Black from Errett. I don't know if any of you recognize or remember Willard, and he died back in 1977, but he was in the same unit with Dad from the time that they went to training until they actually came back through Fort Oglethorpe and Fort Chaffee together. I do have some pictures in here of my dad and some of the stuff. I will tell you that some of them are a little graphic, if you want. I also have a letter that my dad sent through the official Army mail to my grandmother. And he was asking, okay, how are my brothers doing? He was one of 4 brothers. Well, he's the one that served in the service and went overseas. The other one built tanks for GM in Michigan. The other one built PT boats, and were both declared essential. And the last one, he was a lumberman, worked in the sawmill, and they said that they needed all the lumber, and so he could not serve. So 1 out of 4 is what they're there. The thing that was also interesting in this, this book is called the Red Star Book. It's the book of all the people that served in the 6th Division. And one other piece of that is when the division was formed in the 251st and the 250th Division, they split the men from here. Part of them went to the 251st, the other went to 250. They were both supposed to go to Europe. They came in and said, we need a artillery unit to go to the South Pacific, so they took Dad's unit, the 251st. The 250th was totally wiped out in Europe. The last man, every last man was killed in the unit. And so a lot of difference, you never know from one time to the other, you're standing and what's going to take place the next time. But please feel free to come up and look at it, and like I said, I've got their uniforms, I've got the hats, the whole business, so feel free to come and look.
This concludes our program. If you all have any questions, you can ask them now. You can wait till after the program, but feel free to come up and look around. We will not have a program in March. We have an opening in April and May for a program, but we've got a few months to work on those. If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them, and we will see you in April. And if there's a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Second. All right, we'll adjourn. There's no